So over the years, Aaron, what's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered on a boat? What's the weirdest issue you've encountered on a boat?
Oh, man. Over the years, I've seen quite a few. It's kind of hard to pick just one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've got, a lot less experience, so I've got a pretty weird one to throw out there first.
All right, I like it. Let's hear it.
It's interesting. Now, this is just how I imagine the story starting. So they've got this boat in the factory. They're putting it together. You got your fuel tank off to the side there, and they probably have a rag stuffed into the pickup, or not pickup, into the fuel fill hole, and just to prevent any dust or anything from getting in there.
Yeah, grinding fiberglass and putting the boat together.
Yeah, anything like that. And somebody must have just put the fill hose right onto that hose port when the tank got put into the boat, because this guy comes in with a running issue, can't get wide open throttle. And, I'm doing all the basic checks. I'm looking at what the fuel looks like out of the water sep, like just all this stuff. And finally I go out to a sea trial and I see it's not getting enough fuel. It's got a pretty bad restriction in it. And I'm looking everywhere for this restriction. So I chase it all the way down to, it had an anti-siphon valve, and I'm like, 100%, that's it. You know what I mean? I'm going to take it off and take a look at it, and there's like paper poking out of the pickup.
I'm like brown paper?
Like soaked in fuel, just a shop rag was stuffed into the pickup. So I'm assuming he filled it up. It just pushed it, into the tank. Yep. It was floating around.
Yep.
And, eventually after a couple sea trials and talking to the customer, he had mentioned that he ran it low on fuel before bringing the boat in. And that was when it gave him the problems. And, so it just ran low enough. It was floating around, and the pickup just sucked it right up. And it had just enough fuel getting by it, because it's porous. It's a rag that it'll idle and get you up to like 2,500 RPM or something like that. But anytime you try to go wide open, it would just fall right on its face. And that was a friggin' weird one to try to chase down. I was like, what the heck? How do you get a rag? It was funny seeing the guy's reaction.
Oh, yeah.
I come up to him with all these pieces of rag that I pull out of the pickup, and I'm like, I don't know how to say this, but you had a rag in your tank, dude. That's causing all your issues. He's like, what?
I mean, that sounds exactly right. I mean, that's probably true. They're in a factory where they're building these boats. There's like, they put them together in sections. So they probably got, 10 fuel tanks over here, or, like engines over here or whatever. Yeah. And they're putting everything, they're grinding fiberglass, spraying paint, and putting everything together. So yeah, they probably, I bet somebody did. They walk by the tank and be like, oh man, why is this? There's no cap in this. So they stuff a rag in there.
We'll call it a Friday boat.
Oh,
they
man.
Were just trying to get the last one done. They were like, come on, let's get it going.
Yeah, it's funny that you say the anti-siphon valve, because I'm surprised that there weren't any more. So you had to pull the pickup tube out of the tank, or like what?
Well, it was one of those tanks that had the pickup built into the tank, and so it just had like one of those fittings that screws into the pickup and 90s
onto the top of the tank.
Yeah, and I've got a picture to throw up of all these rags stuffed into the into the pickup there. Yeah, and I mean, I was pulling out as much of it as I could, but it's a deep enough tank. And I tried sucking it out, whatever I could and it just there inevitably was some that I had to push back in to get it freed up. And he'd filled up the tank at this point, so I just told him, don't run it empty again.
Yeah.
Or if you do, just immediately go and take this off and try to
pick out
try to pick out whatever it picked up. But
that's nuts. That is nuts. That's unfortunate. Yeah, because the pickup tube's only maybe a half inch or whatever, 5/8. I mean, it's not a big. It's a little tube, and man, that's unfortunate that it's the one that's stuck in the tank that you couldn't pull it out and kind of like
and it was
something
like
through it.
Just as much or just enough of a restriction that you're looking at it, because you go for the initial sea trial to see how it reacts and
get fuel pressure.
It just looked like every other fuel related issue. It looked like routine, like it's probably a clogged filter, or just something dumb, or like a cut in the line. Like it's just having those kind of symptoms. It'll start bouncing and falling on its face when you go wide open for a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, I ended up chasing it for a while and found this rag there.
Stuffed into sucked up the pickup tube.
Yeah.
That is nuts. I've got probably a bunch of fuel. We're going to have probably a bunch of fuel ones to discuss. I would say that's most likely the number one problem on that you get with a boat is going to be a fuel related issue.
Yeah.
I got a pretty good one then. I got, so we had a boat come in, the guy was running it, and he was out there fishing. He said he hit like a tree, like there was a submerged
Like a log or something?
or a branch or a mangrove or something. And he's running along and he hits it. And he trims the engine up, looks at it, no prop damage, no like visible damage that he couldn't see. I mean, he was out on the water, the boat's going up and down in the waves, that kind of deal. So he couldn't, he didn't see everything, but he didn't notice anything like blatant being on the water looking back at the engine. And but he said immediately after that, his engine started overheating, and it would just randomly, like, it would be fine at idle, but anytime you like tried to run it wide open, it would just, or even cruising speed, it would start to overheat. So we get the boat, pull it out of the water. I walk down there and I'm going to look at it, and I just look down the nose cone, and the tree that he hit actually like splintered off and stuffed into the front nose cone of the water pickup, which had it completely blocked. So now, like, he wasn't getting cooling water when he was at speed because, there was a tree sticking out of the
That's
front.
pretty funny. He's just seeing little chips of wood sticking out there.
Yeah.
That's unusual.
Yeah, it was super unusual.
That's just unlucky, man. You got I'm sure anybody else would have just plowed right through that tree and been just fine. Nothing would have happened.
Yeah. There's actually another story, just since we're on that topic right there, hitting, something submerged. I've got a buddy that repowered a boat with I think it was a 23 Mako, and they put I think it was a 250 Evinrude E-Tech on there. First test run of the boat, like the first time they got the boat, there's, an hour on the engine, and they're going to break it in. So they're going to go out to the hump and go fishing and, break the engine up, vary the engine RPMs. They're running out. They get like, I don't know, probably 15 miles offshore, and they hit a telephone pole, like a legitimate, like an actual telephone pole that was floating, and they ramped that pole. Like, they couldn't see it because, the waves as you're going along. They hit it. They ramp off that thing. The engine slams up out of the water onto the back of the transom and then slams back down. And they're both just kind of like, what the heck was that? Like, oh my goodness.
Wait. A telephone pole.
A telephone pole.
Like something you'd see, boom, in the ground on land.
A 40-foot long wood telephone pole floating offshore.
15 miles offshore.
15 miles offshore.
God.
Brand new engine, first time he'd ever even ran the thing.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy.
What?
But that reminded me of that story talking about how the wood chips were stuck in the thing. But he said they had no good luck with that thing after that. Like, it was just first, he was so.
Was there any boat damage done by it, or did they?
He didn't say there was any damage. He just said that, like, the engine, flew back up into the boat because whenever you hit submerged stuff, the engine's got those release valves in the
trim unit.
In the trim unit, yep. So
the memory
engine
pistons
pops
and
up,
everything.
and came back down. The engine didn't shut off or anything. They're just struck there. So they just kind of like turned around and came back home.
Right.
But
well, piggybacking off that overheating you were saying, I did bring it up briefly in the last episode, but that F350 with that exhaust issue, I actually ended up finding some pictures that I can put up to show exactly what I meant. But that one was definitely a weird issue.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell us more about that one, since now you got some pictures to...
Well, yeah, okay. So I can... Basically, the guy, it was a 38 Pursuit with the hood covering the engines, like the weirdest looking boat. And,
right.
And it's actually a pretty cool looking boat too. But anyway, he hit a sandbar. They hit the ground, sandbar, the engine overheated, and it was just, a big catastrophe. They bring the boat to the marina, which actually they were like from Michigan or something, I think, or so from Maine, I think, and they had drove the boat in sections down the coast, but they hit ground at the sandbar and overheat and everything. They just want us to check the engine. They're just like, it fires back up, make sure everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we take the anodes out of the back to see if there's sand packed up in there. Or I dropped the lower unit, and I did end up seeing like these weird rocks. And I think I have a picture of it, but it's like metal, sand, and just it got so hot that it fused together. It was like it had to be molten, and it just hardened up into a rock. And it was just all in the exhaust, like of the lower unit, and just piled in everywhere, falling out of the exhaust in the engine. And I had no idea what it was. I'm assuming it's just sand that they sucked in.
Right.
But you know, we run it on the hose after that, no lower unit on, nothing, and it runs fine. It doesn't overheat. It doesn't, like, we tried everything, and it seemed just fine. So I go to throw the lower unit back up, and I see oil dripping out of the exhaust. I'm like, well,
oh my goodness.
You know, first of all, it never comes out of the exhaust.
No.
But you know, I'm thinking of how that could even happen, because now, you know, you've got oil coming out where it shouldn't be, and you don't exactly want to just start taking this whole engine apart, because then he's got to pay for the labor, and what if there's, like just a whole bunch of issues can go into that. But we ended up just buying like the whole, like every piece in the midsection. Because I looked at the diagram.
Wasn't the insurance adjuster there when you were doing that?
Yeah.
And he like saw the oil too, and he's like,
he was ready to call the engine fine. And
really?
Then that's when, like, as he was leaving, I'm watching this stuff dripping oil, and I call him back. I'm like, hey man, you know, just to let you know, this isn't supposed to be happening. So maybe we should reevaluate this engine. But yeah, I looked at the diagram because I wanted to see kind of what was going on, and I noticed that the exhaust tube is it's in the oil pan.
Right.
So the oil pan kind of has like a little concave hole in the middle of it where the exhaust manifold bolts up. And I'm like, that's pretty much the only place that it could be leaking. Mm-hmm. So, you know, who knows how hot it got. I just made a hypothesis, and we ordered all those parts that were in the midsection, not the actual housing itself that goes around.
Yeah, not the drive shaft housing.
Yeah, and I've got also a picture of that, just all the individual pieces that had to be put together. Mm-hmm. And I ordered them all, and I'm putting it all together. And as I'm taking apart the old one, I notice I don't find the exhaust manifold. I just see these bolts rattling in there where it's supposed to be.
Where it's supposed to be bolted up.
And all that rock or whatever I thought it was, turns out was the exhaust manifold got so hot.
Oh my goodness.
That it just melted and like hardened, and that's what it was that had fallen down the exhaust all the way down into the lower unit. And it was just, it was definitely really weird, but
makes you kind of wonder what temperature that type of metal,
I'd love to see it. Like, I wish there was some way to have a camera in there and see how or what even happened there. Like that had to have been red hot.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. It was red hot.
Because it was gone. I'm looking at the news.
It melted it.
Where's this thing come from? Like, what is this thing? I'm like, oh yeah, that's the exhaust tube.
That's just nuts. I mean, I don't have I'm trying to think of another. Well, obviously there's plastic bag storage, but those are pretty common. I think what we need to do is make a video about more common things that people can end up seeing. So, I mean, I won't include that as a weird story, but I do have another bag story of a boat that, so we're talking about a bag getting wrapped around the lower unit, overheating it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I saw one where the bag, I don't know if it was in a cooler or something, and it got sucked out, blew out the back of the boat and somehow got on the engine, or maybe, no. Okay. I remember now. So this guy, he's got this engine, right? Mm-hmm. And he thought that water was going in through the engine cowling and like getting in the engine through the intakes.
Right.
So what he was doing was he was taking a plastic bag and putting it in the intake on the cowling to keep water from going into the cowling. And I guess one time he forgot to take the bags out, and he goes out and runs the boat and sucks the bags into the engine, like the intake, and it clogged up the cowling where air's supposed to come into the cowling. And so now he's out there running the boat, and it's like, I got this running problem. My engine, like I can't get wide open. It's barely getting on plane. It's just bogging out, like a fuel issue, right? So we go down and look at the boat and kind of looking over everything, and don't really notice too much. Nothing wrong with the engine. Mm-hmm. Well, just happened to be that we look under, like I picked the cowling up, and as I was picking it up, the other person that was there with me, he sees the bag in the cowling on the bottom, and I go to set the thing down. He's like, whoa, what is that? And so we flip it over, and sure enough, there was bags wrapped like in the intake that had like stuffed into the cowling.
Jeez.
And
so even if you did take the cowling off, you couldn't even see it.
No, you couldn't see it. I mean, if you you had to see in the
yeah.
Yeah, because on the top of the cowling is where the air comes in. Damn. And when you flip it up, you can see it. I mean, we'll show the picture of it, but here's white plastic bags being sucked in.
I just want to know what kind of water would have been getting in from there anyway. Like,
I don't know. I mean,
is it raining every night in the Keys where you're getting substantial amounts of water in your...
I don't know.
I mean, hey, to each his own. If he wants to cover it with plastic bags, just...
Yeah, because I can't imagine...
Remember to take them out.
I just can't imagine that a bag blows out of the back of the boat and then is somehow able to get towards the back of it, because on that cowling, it's towards the back. Go around the cowling and come in, that's just...
Mm-hmm.
That's a little unrealistic.
Mike Ganown, I think his name is, right, with Florida Sport Fishing. With the nice CV. This one it's not. I mean, I guess we're talking about weird boat problems, right? So. But it's just, it was not so much a part failing, but he had a tack go bad, and that's just like whatever, it goes bad. He gets a new one sent by his
team.
By his team representative or whatever, and I put it in, and I go to set the thing up. He's on the boat there with me, and I'm trying to explain everything to him how it works, just going through the settings and stuff, just because he wants to know. And the whole thing's in Mandarin, like Chinese. And I'm like, I've never seen this, installing a new tack, but maybe there's like a way to change the language. So I'm trying to like somehow go through all the menus that I know, just like by counting how many times the thing flashes. I'm like, okay, that's calibration. Was there a time? And I'm looking at the other tacks too, to try to, sync them up, see like if I can, okay, bang, I'm on the same page.
See if they'll show the numbers, right?
Yeah. And nothing. And finally we end up calling Mercury about it, and we're like, hey, is there a way to change the language here? Like, could you tell me like just a sequence of buttons so I don't have to try to read Mandarin? And he's like, no, you buy a gauge with the language pre-programmed into it. Like, you can't change that. And I take this thing back out, this tack back out, and I look on the back, and it says reflashed to a whole different serial number than what the serial number was on the box.
Yeah, the part number, whatever it was.
The part number anyway. And somebody, I guess, must have reflashed this thing to Mandarin and packaged it up in a regular box. So this guy gets it sent to him, and he's like, I can't read Mandarin. What am I supposed to do out here? I'm like, dude, well, you're just going to have to order another one, but just look at the analog part of it. Don't even try to read your fuel numbers or anything.
I've never experienced that. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was there when that happened to you, but yeah, because he ordered the tack, and it must have been like where they didn't have one, and like you said, it got packaged wrong somehow. Just somehow, here's this,
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely weird, but that's more like a mishap in the shipping. Process.
The packaging.
Yeah. Because the part number on the box was right. It was supposed to be an English regular tack, and they just put the wrong one in there.
It was a Mandarin Chinese tack.
Yeah.
Just the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's a good story. I do have a funny story, though. It's not really like a problem unless you sell a boat. Mm-hmm. So this one, I had this boat, and it was a 25 Pursuit. It's probably like 3 years ago. 25 Pursuit, 300 HPDI. And we actually did a video on that one. It had an IO. We, got rid of the inboard, put an outboard on there with the bracket and all that. and fix it up, go to sell it, and I sell it. Now, this is why it's so important when you sell a boat that you go to the DMV and change over the title, because the title's still in your name and you still are liable and, responsible for that boat until it's out of your name. Mm-hmm. But I sell this boat. It was on a Friday and I had something to do. So I did the bill of sale, did the title, did the whole thing. And he was supposed to go down to the DMV to change it over. Well, the weekend goes by, and on Monday, I get a phone call from a DEA agent, and he says, Mr. Hilligoss, we've got your boat here in Key West of the impound, and I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. So I'm like, what is going on here? So automatically, I'm like, oh my goodness, what? Like the DEA. And so what ended up happening is this guy that got the boat, he didn't go to the DMV. He went and filled it up, took the boat down to Key West, filled up the tank, and then tried to go to Cuba with it. Now, they obviously wouldn't tell me a whole lot of information about what went down, because it was, I actually ended up speaking with, there was like a border agent, an FWC agent, and the DEA agent that originally contacted me. So you got, basically you got Coast Guard, Border Patrol, FWC, and the DEA involved in this deal. So he left Key West with the boat. I don't know if he made it to Cuba, because I'm assuming that he made it to Cuba, and then he was on his way back, and they intercepted him with whether he picked up,
he probably had so many things. He probably had Cubans to bring over. he had drugs in the boat to smuggle, because the DEA ain't going to call you for a couple of Cubans they found in the boat. You know what I mean? That's just...
So they intersect the boat and they impound it, and they call me and they're like, hey, we've got your boat down here, and they kind of questioned me a little bit, and I'm like, look, I got nothing to do with any of this. Like, I sold that boat on Friday. He was supposed to go to the DMV and change that title. Like, I am, I don't have anything to do with this.
Yep.
And they're like, no, we did a background check. We checked you out. I don't think you're involved in this and that, and the whole 9 yards. And they're like, you want to come get your boat? And I'm like, no, you can have the boat. I don't want anything to do with that thing. Like,
you should have sold that thing again.
I know, but I was more thinking like, okay, here's somebody that's willing to, buy this boat, go to Cuba and do all this stuff, and then come back, and then here I got the boat. I already got the money, Like, that's the first thing I do when I sell the boat. We go to the bank, and I make sure the money goes in the bank before I do anything. Like, because people do that. They'll, especially when you're $5,000-$10,000, you'll have, fake money. Somebody will try and give you 10 grand and 4,000 being fake $100 bills or whatever. So I go to the bank and make sure they check them all and it deposits and it's clean before we go to the DMV. But that was the one time I didn't go to the DMV, and sure enough. But so I'm thinking, well, if he's willing to do all that, then I'm going to try and sell the boat again, and now they're going to have it. I don't exactly know what happened, because they wouldn't really tell me much, obviously, because it's some kind of investigation. I just know that.
Still crazy getting a phone call from the DEA.
Yeah,
for a boat you just sold, getting found with
impounded.
Who knows what?
So that was a nuts. That's not really a problem that you could really, find on your day to day.
Yeah, but hey, I guess just it's a good PSA. Go have your title changed over with you being present, so that you're not going to find yourself in any entanglements.
Make sure, because people do crazy stuff. So
well, back to okay.
Since everybody likes to rag on that HPDI, that was a 300 HPDI you made all the way down Key West, Cuba, and back. So
yeah, well, you got a golden goose freaking HPDI out of them. No. Well,
that's funny.
Yeah, I was going to say that we have the little short about it, the 450R that had the drive shaft splines stuck up into the power head. That one ended up being just a nightmare more than it should have been, because you know, like that's not the craziest thing in the world, seeing the drive shaft splines break into the power head, but the amount of work that it is to get the 450R apart in particular, because it's enough with a regular V8, but with the 450R, everything's just that much more cramped with the supercharger and everything being there. But
well, for people that haven't seen the short, what exactly happened?
Yeah, I was gonna get into basically the anode from the factory. This thing was brand new. I think it had 11 hours. Was it 7? Yeah, 7.
Like 7.
Something ridiculous. It was brand new, and the anode that is bolted up on the lower unit on the anti-cavitation plate it was loose, and the bolts, just with all the vibrations and stuff, you know, it's a 450R. That thing's cooking. The bolts loosened out, and then the anode's falling. Bang! Prop catches it and just stops, locks up the lower unit. Boom! Shears the splines way up into the power head. And normally, like I said, that's not a big deal. You just, you know, you got to pull the power head. So I guess that's the biggest deal of it. But you take the power head out, and normally you just grab the splines, pull them out like nothing. But
this one was twisted.
But yeah, this one was like slightly twisted in there from that force of it stopping. It was probably revving. I mean, who knows? But
who knows?
What do those things rev up to? Close to 7,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Not to mention that was on that. It was on a cat boat. And the thing was on a giant cradle, so it's sitting 10 feet in the air. Yeah. So you're trying to take the power head off on a ladder.
That was my first time taking a V8 power head off in general, and it ended up being
450 with a supercharger,
450R, and it was fun. Don't get me wrong. Like, I've got the pictures of the whole process. Got it stripped down all the way to the AMS, the advanced midsection or whatever, and it was definitely cool having this whole thing apart. But we get the power head off, and the splines are like a solid 2 or 3 inches into the oil pump, because that's the oil pump's bolted up to the bottom there, and the splines go up into it, and it sheared like 2 to 3 inches up in there, and you can't just grab it with anything.
Nope.
We're sticking magnets up there, and they're just not strong enough. Like, you can't. It's like really stuck up in there, and that's when, you know, we came up with. Here's where JB Weld comes in. The JB Weld channel.
Oh.
But you bought this magnet off the Snap-on guy, and
the Blue Point, the big Blue Point one.
Big magnet, and you know, everybody swore up and down. Everybody was like, "Oh yeah, man, I've seen drive shafts break up in there. This magnet will get it for sure, bro. Just put it up there." And no, it broke off the little handle. But we were like, okay, it's still poking out a little bit.
It's welded on there.
Yeah, we've got JB Weld on the thing. So that's when we put together that little Frankenstein build with the slide puller and the vice grips, and that brought it right out. But yeah, it was definitely weird how that all happened with the little anode just coming down. Always check the tightness of those bolts, I guess. You never know.
Well, it's just crazy because, you know, it's also amazing, like, within the manufacturing process, like how much stuff gets put together, and like how many little things you wouldn't even think anything about it. Like, here's this little bolt holding on this little anode, and it just happened to be whatever, you know, happened. Maybe the bolt was faulty, like that holds the anode. Maybe that thing was just, it didn't get machined all the way through. Got put in there, got in, then, and that little thing like caused all that problem.
It's kind of crazy seeing how much little stuff like that slides out of the factory. You know what I mean? But it is what it is. It's just,
it's out of anybody. I mean, you got, you know, hundreds to thousands of people putting together a product like, I mean, think about a boat. All the things inside that boat, from the guy that's putting the mold to putting the gel coat and the paint and the fiberglass, and then the guys that come in that build the stringers and all the stuff, and then the electrical guys and the plumbing guys and the engine guys and the riggers and the T-tops and the towers and the hatches and the latches and the cleats. It's like,
there's a lot of hands on this boat.
A lot of hands.
A lot of room for small little mistakes. They don't happen often, but when they do,
it's crazy.
They make for some good stories.
Now, just to be fair to the naysayers that we're saying about that magnet, oh yeah, it's going to get it out. Now, granted, most of the time, I mean, it's the same situation though, because most of the time what happens when they shear the drive shafts off are the lower unit locks up. So the lower unit locks up, like, either clutch dog breaks, pinion gear breaks, a bearing fails, and it locks up that drive shaft in the lower unit, and your power head's still spinning at, say, 4,500 RPM. Well, that 4,500's got enough power that when that drive shaft stops spinning, it just goes bing, and just
clean
shears it like right off.
Yeah.
So this one, the strength of that drive shaft was enough to where it didn't just shear that drive shaft off. It like twisted it off.
Yeah.
Because it was able to twist those splines, because that's what was holding it up in there. That it like the splines like twisted and were like kind of like rolled over, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
Which normally that's what we do. You stick a magnet up in there and you hit it and then pull it out, but not this time.
Not this time. Yeah, no, that's weird. Didn't you have I know you got a video on that boat that delaminated. I know delaminating isn't a weird issue per se, but how did that all happen? I don't know the story behind that. I don't watch the video. That boat.
See, that was a delamination issue, but it wasn't like a brand, like a boat delaminate, because there are boat brands out there that do delaminate. That I'm not gonna say which brands do, but there are some that do delaminate.
Notoriously.
Notoriously. But no, this boat, the problem with that thing is, so the original person, someone had the boat, they were running it in Miami or something, and I forget what they hit. They hit like a submerged piling or something. I think it was a piling. They like struck it, ripped a hole in the bottom of the boat, like, a decent sized one. And then they went and they got the special somewhere there in Miami. Maybe they got the Hialeah or somewhere, and they got the special fiberglass guy that, I'll fix that up. No worry, I'll fix it.
Super cheap.
Yeah, super cheap.
The cheap repair.
I mean, granted, the problem is that there was no access to the back side of it. So in the glass repair, really you have to get to both sides depending on what the repair is in order to, put glass on the inside. Well, there was no access to get down there. So that would have been a super, super expensive repair, because someone's going to have to go in there, cut part of the cap out to get to where the hull is.
Yeah.
And then, glass it from the top and glass it from the bottom. Well, they didn't do that. Because they didn't have access, they just tried to glass it from the bottom. And then obviously it's wet. And, that's the first thing you got to do is dry it out if you're going to try and, get something to bond. And they didn't dry it out. They just, probably over the weekend, just scuffed, scratched it on the outside, tried to repair it, made it look clean. I mean, it looked clean. You couldn't tell. But the problem is that it wasn't structurally
going to hold.
No, it wasn't going to hold. So they sell the boat, and then this guy, this other guy buys it. Oh, it's a great boat. I've heard about these boats. I like this. I like that. It rides great. He buys it, and over the process of time, that repair fails. The boat starts taking on water to the point where it had so much water in it where it just ripped that hole clean open. Like, it just ripped the repair open. And then, obviously the boat just continued to take on water until, well, it's unusable. And then, back to the original problem. In order to get that fixed, you've got to cut the cap out to get to the back to get to fix it. So that was definitely an unfortunate.
That happened on a sea trial, right? Or
no? Yeah.
Yeah, it happened.
Because he brought it in and said, no, the boat's not going.
Yeah.
There's no,
Yeah. And that would suck to be that tech, taking it out on a sea trial and boom, there goes part of the bottom of your boat.
Nuts. Crazy.
I'm trying to think of something else. Well, I've seen a lot of like there was a couple boats that use a little brass tube. Or a couple engines that use a little brass tube as the water pickup in the midsection.
Yeah, the cooling tube coming from the lower unit.
Yeah, and
like a copper tube.
There was one I did on like a 25 horse Mercury, I think it was, a little small engine, and That was another fun little job, just taking that thing down to nothing but the
adapter plate.
Yeah, the adapter plate. Also on a 3.3, those Yamahas on a rental boat. I have one that was. I think I've got a video of how hot the water was getting when I was trying to find the.
Yeah, what was going on with it?
Yeah, because it was just doing. It was, I don't know. It was acting weird, but eventually find that tube and it's just got a hole in it and it's spitting all that water. He's got no water pressure, and that's why it's peeing weak and all that. But on this little guy, the 30 horse, it's apparently a pretty common thing, and it was like the second time on that same engine that it had been done. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, don't want to call out that 25 horse Merc, but
that's what I've got on my Boinetters, 25 horse.
Dude, that thing, I mean, it's a pretty common little issue apparently, but it's just a weird one because you're trying to figure it out, and you look up in there and see a little hole. So this one in particular, there was a hole at the base.
Yep, that's usually where it goes.
Where it was into the midsection, or the adapter plate. So it was like you kind of had to hope that there actually was a hole there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh
yeah, there's no I mean, you can stick a borescope up there, but a lot of times, so like on the 3.3, like those would the copper would like rot out, and on those.
Oh, because it's copper, not brass?
Maybe it is. It's either...
Well, isn't brass supposed to not corrode?
I can't remember if it's brass or copper, but
it is.
I think it is a brass tube. I think you might be right about that. But either way, copper, brass, doesn't matter. On those little ones, a lot of times there's a rubber gasket. So at the top of the tube, it's like flanged over. And since it's flanged over, that flange, it sits in like this rubber O-ring. Well, it builds, like salt water will sit up in there, and then it'll start to build up that salt. So over time, that salt builds up into where it starts to compress that O-ring, and then it like smashes the tube.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't remember too much what it looked like. It was a little while ago, but if I've got a picture of the tube itself and what it looked like, then we'll put that up. But definitely a weird issue. Speaking of corroding and eating away, you showed me a picture of a lower unit that had like a bunch of the front of it.
Oh, yeah. Electrolysis. Yeah.
How exactly does that happen? Like what? Well, stray currents, electrolysis, all that stuff. How is that?
Now, that boat, I think on that specific boat, there was a lift that was leaking. I'm not 100% sure about that, but on that one, I think it was in Duck Key, and there's a lot of lifts there. So I think on that one, there was a lift that's leaking, 220 volts into the water, and it was just going straight for the lower unit. You trim the engines up out of the water, and some of them you still have the nose of the lower unit still stuck in the water. Well, that stray current was just going straight to those engines and just eating up that metal. And it legitimately ate like the whole front of the nose cone out on both of them. And then it was starting to eat the bracket up on the starboard. And then on the port, it ate up so much of the trim unit that the trim unit actually like fell down because the base of it was just so rotted away that there wasn't.
It's great. How fast does something like that happen?
Pretty fast, because I want to say those engines were only like 3-4 years old. Yeah, like it was amazing. Like
yeah, how quickly that stuff gets eaten away.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, that some of that stuff you don't even see because your boat's in the water. So like brackets, stuff like that, like you'll be at an area if your boat lives in the water, and it starts getting eat away, and you don't know why,
Yeah. So how do you prevent that?
You can bond them, and then other than that, if you got stray current from the dock, you need to
figure that. Well, how do you figure that out other than seeing your lower unit eating away? Yeah,
you use so there's a corrosion reference electrode that you can put down in the water, and then that is gonna, kind of it gives you the measurement of how much current's in the water. So you've got different ways of having, either stray current or galvanic corrosion or different types of corrosion. That's why you see all the bonding wires on all the anodes and the like through-hole fittings and stuff like that to, help with that problem. And then also the anodes. Your anodes are also used for also balancing out that, galvanic from putting metal into water.
Well, they're sacrificial. So,
yeah, they're sacrificial.
So it just goes to them first.
Yep. But if they get too worn or they get too light or they even get covered in stuff, then they won't work properly. And you can also overprotect. So if you put, if you have overprotection, then it still doesn't, there's like a balance there that you need, based on how much metal's in the water. But on that one, my guess is he had a charger on the boat and he had the charger plugged into, shore power, which is now adding that earth ground from the charger to the boat system and then through the bonding wires of the boat. Now that stray current from that lift is now going straight through there, straight back, and then through the charger back to the ground, I guess you'd say. But it's crazy.
It's interesting to let that get out of hand.
Oh yeah, for too long. I mean, gonna have a real expensive time. I mean, that fuel pump. So kind of based back on this corrosion and rust topic. There was a 3.3 liter Yamaha, and center engine would just stop running. It was running out of fuel. And on those engines, there's like a low pressure fuel pump on the outside of the VST that, sucks fuel to feed the VST. And that pump had gotten, like, it was just so old and so rusted that the body of the fuel pump rusted to where there was a hole in it, and it would turn on and pump, and it was sucking the fuel out of the fuel tank and then just blasting it out the side of the fuel pump. So it was filling his whole cowling up with fuel, and his engine wouldn't run. But like if he had the key on and it was like there were, I couldn't remember if the engine would run or if it wouldn't run at all.
It probably wouldn't run. I mean, you turn the key on and spraying all the fuel right out of the pump.
I'm not 100% because I want to say that it was like enough to where it was still feeding the VST. So there was enough for it to like idle, but like not enough because it was just spraying out. Like it was almost like a mist, but it was a solid stream with a mist coming out of the side of the pump. Yeah. And I think it was still feeding the VST. It was able to idle, but it wouldn't, like it was, obviously had a running issue. Yeah. But yeah, I pulled the cowling off and I'm like, oh, that's a lot of fuel, And then on that one, it had the individual throttle bodies, so I could take the airbox off. When I turned the airbox off and crank it, you see the fuel spraying out the side of the thing. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So that was weird. Totally weird.
Fuel issues with corrosion and stuff I've seen on it was one of the two conchs boats, a yellowfin. The fuel pickup just had it corroded, but it corroded in a way where there was like dirt and stuff and salt and everything covering where the hole was. So if you just look at the pickup, you wouldn't be able to tell. But the way we found it, he was saying that he smelled fuel in his bilge after the last time he filled up the boat. Right. And yeah, there was a bunch of fuel like pooled up in the bottom of the boat. And we're wondering how. We're looking for a leak somewhere, and the lines and the filters everywhere. And eventually I just I told the forklift operator to take me out of the water and tilt the boat back on the forks. And I popped the hatches for the pickups and everything, and I'm looking at everything, and now I'm seeing like more fuel running and getting added into this, and I look at the pickup and see it just squirting right out the side. There's a hole corroded right in the side of it, and that was fun. Pulled that out, sent it off to the welder. He welded the hole back up and threw it back in there.
Yeah, because those, so every time he filled it up, it would just pour out of the top until it got down enough to not. And those yellowfins, they got that like round plate that's got like the the pickup and the fuel sender and like that stuff mounted all like together, so you can't really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another issue with yellowfin fuel tank, I didn't really deal with this boat, so you'd have to enlighten me, but wasn't there something with the fuel tank having to get replaced in a 36 yellowfin there?
Yeah. Yeah. Now those, I mean, that's happened to other brands too. That was a lot of like, you know, boats that make fiberglass tanks. So they you know, they make a fuel tank into the deck of the boat, into the gunnel and by the sides of the stringer. So it's, you know, part of the boat. So the fuel tank's made out of fiberglass and they painted it. Now, just over the process of time, the fuel was stripping the paint off of the sides of it. Now, I don't know if there was ethanol or if it was just straight fuel, because I bet if you used ethanol, that would speed up the whole thing a lot more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you think about paint, like as it dries out and gets older, you know, it'll crack and then it'll chip off. So then you'll have like, you know, paint chips.
Right.
Well, that's what happened in this. So the inside of the tank, all the paint on the sides of the fuel tank had cracked and chipped off. And so the fuel tank was just completely full of all these paint chips. And so now, and in those boats, so that model of boat, it has like a really long, narrow fuel tank because it's got 3 fuel tanks. There's one big one in the middle and then 2 saddle tanks. And the saddle tanks are like long and they're not, you know, they're not that wide. They're not skinny. So the pickup tubes on those aren't like just a normal straight tube that goes down. They actually are like this long and it like goes down and it bends and then it goes up like that to kind of like suck the fuel out of the, you know, where the stringer and the actual
same kind of pickup on
hull of the boat.
On the one with the hole corroded in it, but keep going.
So that thing was just, the pickup tube was just covered in paint chips, so it wasn't getting any fuel. And obviously, when you take that thing,
how did you figure that out? How did you find the paint chips, or what did you?
I pulled the pickup tube out of it, and then
there was enough of a hole you could see the little paint chips.
Shine a flashlight down in there and look. What in the heck is this?
and wasn't there a mess putting that new tank in there?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was a whole nother thing because they didn't reuse those. They actually made, you know, so now what they do for that boat, they make aluminum tanks and then just set those tanks down in there. And in order to do it, because like on that boat, like the deck is not flat. Like it's one of those boats that's got the channels on the side for water. So when water comes in the boat, there's got like, you know, a ditch basically this big on the sides of the boat where the water goes off the deck, goes in that channel, and then it runs all the way to the back of the boat. Yeah. So in order to cut the deck out to get down to the tank, you have to cut up on the sides of the gunnel. So you want to cut, you know, this far up the gunnel in order to be able to make a smooth, you know, to glass that back without, because, you know, glassing a curved edge is a whole different deal. So that's what you do. They cut, you know, up the gunnel and then the whole sides of the tank and then cut down and then back and then rip that thing off. But they had to take, you know, those boats all had towers. So the towers had to come off. Center console has to come out. And you're de-rigging the whole boat, pulling the console, the tower and everything out of the middle, then cutting it all out and then putting it all back together. So it's a massive process to have to undertake.
That's just incredible. That I why would you paint the inside of a tank? Is that
they're not the only ones that did it? So I mean,
I guarantee they're not the only ones that did it, but it's still weird nonetheless. Maybe that's just me.
I mean, when you think about it, you're kind of trying to protect the resin. I guess if you would take fuel and put it onto bare resin and glass, there's going to be some kind of a chemical.
It's probably not good there.
You know, and it'll maybe gum up the. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know that much about chemicals and you know how they're going to react with different. Yeah. Like, you know, you take fuel, which is its own chemical craziness altogether, and then you know fiberglass and resin is, that epoxy resin is its own
type of reaction that would have.
Reaction.
It's probably necessary, but it's weird that it wouldn't hold up to the fuel.
Because we haven't had any, like the Venture, that 99 Venture, that thing's got fiberglass tanks in it. And pretty sure those are fiberglass.
The 34?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure those are fiberglassed in there, unless they've got the fuel tanks, an aluminum tank, glassed in. It's a similar thing, and they haven't had any issues. So, who knows?
Yeah, probably just a one-off thing. I remember there being something with a Freeman. This was early when I started at the marina, but I remember you guys all dealing with a Freeman that had a running issue and it was brand new, like just straight out of the factory. What was...
Yeah, that's another whole crazy thing. Like, so on that boat, the starboard engine, it was starving for fuel. So he go out and run it, and at wide open throttle, ran great. No problems, no issues. But if you let the engine idle, after like 15, 20 minutes, the engine would start to shake and run out of fuel and do all kinds of sporadic stuff. So it was like totally weird.
Pretty backwards normally.
Totally backwards.
Normally you can't get wide open with fuel issues, but sure, yeah.
So eventually we're looking at this thing. We test everything. We look at all these parts and everything, and put the clear hose on there. And finally it was like, after it was running for a while, like, so you would start to see air bubbles. So it was running out of fuel and starving for fuel. Well, we trace all the way back to where the rigging tubes come out, and on the fuel line coming from the fuel tank all the way back through the rigging tube, where it came out the rigging tube, there was just like a slight cut in the fuel line. I don't know if maybe like, when someone cut it in the box, or maybe like it got rubbed up against like a screw, or what it was, but it was just a slight little cut in the tube, enough to where it wasn't like leaking out fuel, and at wide open throttle, it was flowing fuel like no problem. But at idle, it would suck in enough air to be able to starve the engine. Yeah, nuts.
It's just little things from the factory that
or just people
easily overlooked. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not blaming Freeman.
Yeah, no,
Mr. Freeman. Hey, bud, you're. But I'm just saying, like, little things in the manufacturing process. It's where there's so many stories of just that. Just that weird things you see out of the factory.
Yeah, where some, they call it the Friday boat or something like that, where just maybe somebody was getting fired, maybe something was having trouble at home, like, or maybe just somebody had a bad day, or like, no one's perfect. Everybody's got things that happen in your life, and it's just funny when you see the end result of, this event over here, and it's like,
when you're having to fix something that was caused by that, and you finally find it after pulling your hair out, it's like, how did that happen? You're just sitting there flabbergasted. But everybody makes mistakes. We've done plenty of them.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So
now, on that same line, since we're talking about that fuel hose, I've got a pretty good picture of gray and blue hoses. It's not so much a problem as it was back in the day, but they used to have these gray and blue hoses. Actually, I think you can still buy the gray hose, but there was a liner inside this fuel hose, and the fuel would eat at that liner, and the liner would separate from the fuel hose itself, and then the fuel pump would suck it. It'd suck that liner down, and it would starve itself of fuel. But
how do you how do you release fuel hose meant for holding fuel that the liner inside the hose what?
It separates from the actual hose and then collapses.
Okay.
I mean, you don't see a lot of it anymore.
How often was that?
It used to be quite often. I mean, I got a picture of one, because it's also, some of those hoses were super they weren't like that. Some of them are hard and some of them weren't. Well, someone had some extra hose when they pulled it into the engine, and opposed to just cutting the hose off and making it,
to length. Yeah.
to length, which me with wiring, I like a little extra. I like a little extra with everything. But this was like an extra like foot and a half. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was they pulled it in the cowling, and then opposed to like cutting anything off, they just took the hose, bent it like this, and then bent it back over on it. So it's like a hose comes in, bends back, bends forward, and then goes up to the thing. And they just shoved it down into the cowling.
Eventually it just became a Z.
Yeah, it was like a Z with one more.
Sharp kinks in it, yeah.
Super sharp kinks. Crazy. Like, guys complaining about no wide open throttle and running issues. It's like, pull the cowling off and like, you pull the hose out of the cowling. Like, well, here's your problem, dude. Like,
dude, I just thought of one. It was a pretty recent one with a 300R V8, and it's the oil cooler that goes down into the... It goes into the midsection, right? Or is it into the base of the power head? And then, well, I don't know. The oil cooler, though, where it goes down in there, there's two O-rings, and it's a machine fit pretty much. But there was this Andros that had a couple of 300Rs, and it was leaking oil, but like not just leaking oil, like a drop or two, like leaking copious amounts of oil. Dude went through, he said there was a giant sheen in the water, and when he had somebody out there looking at it, it lost like a gallon in the time that the guy had.
Oh my goodness!
Had the engine running there, and he was like, "Dude, I can't work on it out here. Like, I've got to pull this thing out of the water to find this leak." And pulls it out of the water, takes the chaps off, and sees where the leak's coming from. Like, literally, all you got to do is crank it. You don't even have to have the engine running, and it's just spraying
out the side of the oil cooler hose tube.
Yeah, and that's just weird. I don't think the boat's that old. I don't think the engines are that old. So it's a weird thing to see go, but and getting it out, I heard, was a nightmare too.
Yeah,
if he even has.
I don't know,
but yeah, it's going to be a warranty thing for sure. Seeing how new they are. You had something with an oil cooler, or was it just? It was a non-R engine, right?
Yeah, I've had
oil leak.
I've had a couple different of those same scenarios where like one of the parts. So the oil filter sits on this like, or no, not the oil filter, the oil cooler. Yeah, the oil filter. The oil filter sits on this adapter that then attaches to the oil cooler, and in between that cooler and the adapter. The adapter had a scratch on the mating surface where it attached to the oil cooler. So when it was running, same thing, it would just pour out oil. And I've also seen one where from the factory they had where the power head comes down and sits down on the midsection where it goes onto the base gasket. In the base gasket, a piece of a metal shaving got stuck there when the power head got put down onto the midsection. And so now same thing, it was leaking oil out through this little itty bitty metal shaving that somehow got, blown on and actually landed right where the base gasket goes, and then got put together with that piece of metal shaving there. It's just like,
the smallest little thing. Smallest little thing will do it, because it's like a machine surface.
100%.
You got to be careful.
100%.
Even cleaning it up. If you use a razor blade or something and you go too aggressively, you can actually shave some of that aluminum off, and it'll
warp it.
Yeah. Cause a little dent in there, and then oil will start getting by the gasket. You better believe it.
It's crazy. The things that you could see. What other things have you?
I don't know. Really, I've also seen a weird one with just like backyard things. I found a framing nail used as a cotter pin, just rusty and stuck in there, and it was like, come on, dude.
He probably
lost his cotter pin, changing his proppers, or whatever the case. Go get a cotter pin. They can't be that expensive.
Put a nail,
a non-stainless framing nail.
Yeah.
Can't believe that.
Might have been like one under maybe not like a solid framing nail, but like maybe a framing nail would fit in that little hole. I don't know. I mean, I've seen the picture, so I think it is a framing nail, but I think it's a little bit smaller. I don't know, but yeah, that's too funny.
Whatever the case, just a nail.
Yeah, it's just
not the right thing that's supposed to be in there.
I've had to deal with that recently too, where someone did the same thing. They put a cotter pin in there, but it was a non-stainless cotter pin, and they rust. Mm-hmm. So go to change to pull the prop off, to grease the shaft, check for line, all that kind of stuff. Can't get it off because the cotter pin, like where the nut is on both sides, like it was shaved completely off on both sides of the nut, but left the middle section of this, cotter pin. Mm-hmm. So we ended up just having to spray it with, lube, and then, try and work the nut back and forth on it to grind the rust down to make a thread where I can finally put the impact on it, and then just zip the nut off, and then, come back with a pick and hammer out that rusted cotter pin to get, to change the stuff. It's like, oh my goodness.
Nightmare.
Too much. Way too much.
I've seen one that wasn't really, it was a different kind of, I don't know who installed it, maybe another tech or the customer himself, but I saw a picture of a sea trial, and there's just this giant rooster tail off the back of the boat because the transducer was mounted wrong, and it was just sitting in the water weird. Yeah.
So it mounted the transducer way too low and just...
Yeah, it was way too low, and it was just causing a lot of drag, and the water was just shooting right off the end of it. Just a giant rooster tail looking like a jet ski.
Oh, no.
But...
yeah, that's
just
weird.
Yeah, it's an installation fail.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think we're starting to run out of time, but I'll give one more. So, which one do I want? All right. So, I've got one. I think I've shown that video of like these motor mounts, how motor mounts break. Like if a motor mount breaks, then you can move the outboard back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. And you can pick them up and slam the engine down. But there was one where the shift shaft went down into the lower unit. The complaint was that he'd go into gear, and then when he tried to come out of gear, the engine wouldn't come out of gear. It was stuck into gear. Trying to go to the dock, and now his boat won't come out of gear, and he's driving towards the dock and creating a massive hazard. So go there looking at it, and I'm like, man, that engine's a little tilted, like, and I really look at it, and the whole shift shaft is like this. So then I pick the thing up and pull it back, and sure enough, the motor mounts were broken. Mm-hmm. And what was happening is whenever you put it in gear, the prop would push the whole engine like this, and it would lock up that shift shaft. So then when he tried to come back to gear, it wouldn't come out of gear because it had the shift shaft pinned up against the, like, there's a hole where it comes out, the like swivel pin or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it locks up that shift shaft to where it just wouldn't come out.
Yeah. So you gotta turn the engine off, pick the engine up, put it in neutral.
Well, no, if you turn the engine off, it would take the load off of it. Okay, so with the load of the prop pushing the
So you just
forward.
turn it off, and you can put it back in neutral.
Yeah, you turn it off, you pull it back to neutral, and then you're fine.
Start it back up.
And then when you put it in gear, the thing's like bang.
Dude, somebody would find a way to make that work for a long time.
Yeah, put a block in between there, like in where the motor mount goes.
Screw it, dude. I'm riding this thing out.
A stack of washers or something in there.
Yeah.
Be a rough ride.
JB want a stack of washers in there. Hold it nice and secure.
No.
Oh, well.
Yeah, the motor mount one's definitely...
I think that's about it for story time.
Okay. All right. We'll close it out. We'll see you.
Yeah. If you guys enjoyed it, then, let us know you want to hear more stories. If not, keep the comments coming. We'll get back to answering some of those questions too. But,
you can hit us up with an email at askbab@boardingandboating.com. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah.